Actually, it started here at UT Austin when I was an undergrad, and there were a number of movements taking place on campus. I remember there was one big movement called the campus movement to end the occupation. So this was against the Iraq War, and I got involved with them. I got involved with some Palestinian organizing, and also I was lucky to have 2 or 3 professors who became my mentors. One was, of course, Kamran Azdarali, who guided us through theory, through history, through politics, particularly of Asia and Pakistan. And then also Akbar Haider Saab, who was very pivotal in bringing us towards progressive literature, progressive history in South Asia. So I think that was a very important formative experience. And once I returned to Pakistan after my undergrad, I kind of started exploring progressive organizations, and slowly, without even some kind of a big plan, I started getting involved, more and more involved in labor organizations, farmers organizations, student organizations. And I think that became the big kind of question for me, because this is a Pakistan which was still ravaged by the war on terror. Violence was very much a part of our lives. We had recently witnessed the murder of popular former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, which was very shocking for many people. We grew up in this atmosphere of a US-backed military dictatorship. So the questions of empire, democracy, dictatorship, human rights, terror, violence, all of them were very much a presence in our consciousness. And I think that's where we got interested in those questions. Of course, drone strikes then became a big thing in Pakistan, again, very much connecting imperial violence to the everyday life in parts of the global south. And more people around us became involved in politics. And because we had this training from UT Austin on the history or legacy of the left, which was a very small kind of a tradition in Pakistan, a glorious tradition, but since the fall of the Soviet Union, it was a small tradition. We were able to gravitate towards that, while other friends of ours went into new kinds of political formations, including Imran Khan's party, which was taking off at that time. And I think it's the questions from that whole experience where we saw how the left in the whole region, not just in Pakistan, but Afghanistan and other parts of South Asia, how it was decimated, what role empire played, what was the history of anti-colonial struggles, of movements for women's emancipation, minority rights. These questions, which were becoming more and more palpable in my everyday life, kind of pushed me towards returning to academia. And that's when I became interested in history, and more specifically in left-wing communist history. And that's where I returned for a PhD in communist thought in colonial India. Well, it's an interesting question, because one of the paradoxes of this claim that Marxism is a Western idea is that it is an idea that became initially popular in what's today known as the West, Europe. However, it's the only European idea that never won in Europe, but only won across the global South. Right? So the Soviet Union was very much in the periphery of Europe, and then Central Asia. It won decisive victories in China, in Cuba, in Kerala, in Bengal, in Nepal, in Nicaragua. In so many African countries, Angola, Mozambique, others. So it's this paradox where a European idea actually doesn't become very popular in Europe, remains a marginal political current, although that changes in the 1960s, 70s, but becomes the most dominant mode of expressing the anti-colonial desires of people of the colonized world. And that complicates first the idea of origins, whether this is an idea that belong to the West, or does it belong to the peasants of Angola and Congo and the workers of China? So it complicates that kind of origin story of an idea. So I was interested in that. And second, I was interested in how such an idea, when it travels across space, is it simply a question of theorists or political activists in the global south simply reproducing what has already been thought through in the Western world? So is there like a categorization of the canon where the thinking is happening from Europeans, like Europeans are doing the thinking, and then we are doing the acting. We're actually bringing revolution. So we're the laborers of this global division. And increasingly, I thought this was a totally inadequate way of looking at history, because these practitioners of Marxism, someone like Mao in China, or Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, or Fidel Castro in Cuba, they were not simply practitioners. They were also people who were radically rethinking Marxism in order to make it speak to the crisis, to the questions emanating from their situations, from their countries, their societies. So there is a process not just of repetition, but also of difference, of translation, of reinterpretation, of rethinking, and often of rupture. The fact that a theory of progress and of the working class became a theory of marginality and peripheries and the peasantry, which was viewed as a backward reactionary class in some of the writings of Marx and Engels. This is a momentous rupture in the history of Marxism. And the progress of a thought often takes place through these ruptures. So that by the end of it, what you have in any kind of a theory, the final product is the result of a collective struggle of many people, including many subaltern people, often actually them being the leading characters in this history, that force a rethinking of our conceptual tools. And yet I was very dissatisfied with the way history of communism was written, where one, the canon is of course very Western. The Eastern Marxists or Marxists in the global South were not given their due, partly because they were not university professors. They were out in the fields, they were in jail, they were doing their writings from prisons, from factory floors, from village struggles in rural heartlands of these countries. So the site was very different. The site of enunciation of this theory was very different. And second, their victories almost became kind of a negative thing for them. So that, you said, okay, this is not true Marxism. And that for true Marxism, you then have to go back to Marx, which some professor in France or England or America would do. And this is something that happened in the 60s, 70s with his return of Marx with Althusser and others. So that theory almost becomes a religious text where you have to go back to the origin to see where the deviations took place, and the deviations were sinful. And I kind of reject that idea. I think this kind of adherence to the text is a very Western academic problem. And actual theory is produced not just in conversation, but is actually also embedded in the practices of subaltern classes, not just in the West, but in the global South. And Marxism is a very good concept to allow us to rethink this history of ideas, because of the fact that it was so successful in the global South. So I was not a student leader, I was a teacher, and my students were student leaders, of course. I think the war on terror and the increasing repression created this idea that universities are sites of sabotage, of subversion, of anti-state elements. We saw that not just in Pakistan, in India, in different parts of the Arab world, in Africa, and of course now in the US, we're seeing a very brutal iteration of the same kind of tendency of criminalizing dissent. And this goes against the very idea of a university which is meant for developing critical thought. And this is one thing that I felt when I returned to take up a teaching position in Pakistan. I've grown up in Pakistan and did activism in Pakistan, so I wasn't expecting it to be anything like England or the US, and I don't think it even should be like that. It will have its own trajectory eventually. But I was kind of taken aback by the way the kind of militarization was operating in universities in Pakistan, where decisions on syllabus, on seminars, on even reading groups on campus were being approved or denied by people associated with the security apparatus. And the security apparatus on the campus was always the most empowered apparatus, which totally goes against the very idea, the very concept of the university, which is supposed to be a space where people feel secure in promoting critical thinking, promoting dissent, debating ideas that are not allowed to be debated in society. I mean, it's not a place where common sense or tradition has to be reproduced infinitely. It has to be a place where things have to be challenged, and common sense of society can be challenged as well. So I saw that kind of closing in front of me. I also saw my students getting picked up for their activism, which was very, very disturbing for me. Of course, I loved my students like any teacher does, and I raised my voice for those students, which got me fired from one university. At this other university, when there was these questions that these student leaders were raising on some of the core or key issues facing Pakistan, I lent my support to them, and I was charged with sedition, and some of my students were also picked up and charged with sedition. And there's a story I often tell that one member of the security apparatus met me, an intelligence guy, and said, you should stop discussing politics in your classrooms. And I said, that's fine. The only problem is, of course, I am a professor of political science. So if you can give me a way of circumventing discussing politics in class, then I'll be grateful. Also, you'd be a genius for doing that. It kind of reiterated the fact that those who were at the helm did not have a clue what the university system is about. And that eventually led to my dismissal from this university, after which my academic career more or less ended in Pakistan. However, I'm still very active in the public sphere. I'm still doing a lot of podcasts like I'm doing with you guys. Also doing a lot of reading groups, informal reading groups with students, teachers. So, alhamdulillah, I feel like I still have access to the public domain, and that's why I never wanted to leave Pakistan, because I don't want those who want to suppress voices to get this impression that by denying one space to people, they can actually close all doors. Also, I don't want to discourage anybody who wants to come back to Pakistan from coming back, because I think everybody finds him or herself in a different situation, but there are many ways of building a community, building an academic community. And that might even be useful for people here in the US, which is under attack right now, where universities are under attack, that there will always be new ways, new things that were foreclosed by the university system will open up if one perseveres. Well, the first part is about fighting cynicism, because I think there's this trend amongst intellectuals that the more cynical you are, the cooler and bigger intellectual that you are. And I find that to be a bit misplaced, also maybe slightly cowardly at times, because cynicism is a natural response to the state of affairs. The situation induces cynicism. You don't need to fight cynicism. If you imbibe upon the general kind of ideological air that we breathe, it induces cynicism. It forecloses the possibilities of any kind of a new utopia. It tells us that the way things are happening, this moment is eternal. The status quo is eternal, and the only option for us is either submission or some kind of aesthetic refusal, where one is, of course, acting like a cynic, but is actually accepting the premise that the system is immutable. In that sense, one is accepting the framework of those people who one despises. Against this kind of submission or surrender, it's very important to create a space for true critical thought. And true critical thought is not only critical of the status quo, it also sees the contradictions and the possibilities within a given conjuncture, within a given situation. And my own belief is that it'll be very hard for any power, based on what we know historically speaking, for any imperial power, for any tyrant to say that their rule is eternal. In fact, the rule of history has changed. And where one can embed oneself is to think through the current moment, think through its contradictions, and see what kind of changes can we induce. And that requires courage, both at the level of physical well-being, because, of course, in certain situations in Pakistan and others, that is a very real danger of physical well-being. But also it requires the more important courage, the courage that's more important for us as academics or intellectuals. It is the courage to say no to the frameworks being given to us, and the primary no is to this idea that nothing is possible, that the human adventure of 100,000 years has ended with neoliberalism, with the IMF, with militaries, with these kingdoms and these tech bros that are taking over the world. It would be a very sad kind of end to the human adventure if we truly believe that this is it, this is the final moment. Against this pessimism, against this cynicism, one must seek out the contradictions and always get hope from the millions and millions of people who are resisting because they cannot afford to be cynical. Slum dwellers resisting, peasants who are being evicted resisting, ethnic minorities resisting, women resisting, all kinds of groups that you look at for whom survival means resistance. And we're seeing that in Gaza right now. They don't have time to be cynical. They must fight back, they must resist, and we must try to link our thought to those who are refusing cynicism, and that can allow for a new kind of utopia to emerge. And the enlightened impatience is exactly that. It means we have to be impatient because the costs of the status quo are enormous, as we're seeing all over the world, but it cannot be knee-jerk and reactionary. We have to think through. So kind of a slow impatience, if you will, the paradox, the enlightened impatience, slow impatience that can both allow us to fight back, but also carve a way out of the present. That's a very interesting question. In terms of why these movements are taking off, their response to immense forms of plunder and repression. It appears to me that states across the world, and Pakistan is part of that story, they've given up on any kind of long-term planning for their societies. Because of the environmental crisis, because of the war on the horizon that we see, the global tensions, the thinking of the ruling classes has become very short term. And they want to make as much money, as much financial gain as possible through loot, plunder, privatizations, destruction of environment, war. In such a situation, citizenship is being hollowed out because these, the people who are dependent on these ecologies that are being destroyed, for example, in Sindh, there are people who are dependent upon these border areas next to Afghanistan and Iran, Pakhtoonkwa and Balochistan, but that's where the minerals are. So there's perpetual war and conflict over there. There are people living in farms and agricultural lands in Punjab, but that's where you need to do corporate farming, so you have to kick them out, evict them. In Karachi, there are people living in goats, there are people living in Kachi Abadis, there are people who had a stake in the city. So you needed military operations to clear all of that out so that the developmental model of the city could be changed. All of this does not fit into any kind of a long-term plan, but fits into this kind of short-termism in which some people can make a lot of money while sacrificing ordinary people. It's really about wasting their lives. And in that sense, these struggles are very much about protecting the sanctity of lives, protecting the right to exist for a lot of these people who live on the margins. And a second thing that's happened is that the traditional representatives have either been defeated or they've sold out. So the political parties in a place like Pakistan, they've done such a poor job of representing or misrepresenting the interests of the people of Pakistan that a lot of people are no longer willing to see them as the primary vehicles for expressing their anger. So you have all kinds of Pashtun parties in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa where people chose PTM, the Pashtun Tahfuz movement. You have so many Baloch Sardars in Balochistan, yet Dr. Marang is being chosen. You had a lot of student groups of these political parties, but it was these left-wing students who became the voice for student unions in Pakistan. Similarly, in Sindh, you have many parties in Sindh, and yet it is new movements that are becoming very central. What is the international kind of imagination of these movements? I think there are different elements in it. There are of course, more left-wing elements who are looking at things like the Punjab Kisan movement, or are very much worried and partly inspired by what's happened in the Middle East in terms of both the genocide and the resistance to it. There are people who are following what's happening inside China, the China-US rivalry. That's something that's of a lot of interest to people. So there are groups that are thinking about those things. But I don't think there's necessarily a unified kind of a global imagination because of the immediacy of the crisis. I mean, that's one of the problems of the post-colonial condition, that the crisis is so immediate that horizons shrink. And if one is thinking about protecting one's missing brother or a comrade who's in jail, or someone who's been fired from work and you have to support them or yourself financially, that creates such a heightened sense of urgency and immediacy that at times it's difficult to have those kind of like broad horizons and broad views of the situation. But they are being developed, and international relations, particularly because of the current government in the US, they're imposing themselves in the lives of ordinary people all over the world. So they're very much becoming part of the discussion. And I'm very hopeful about a number of things, including some young folks who are getting very active around ecological issues in Sindh and Punjab, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Jr. being one of them, young folks from Khalq Youth Front being also very active. A lot of Sindhis, Punjabi farmers, middle class citizens really getting organized. And they are the left wing of this entire social upheaval we see. And if they can articulate themselves and their movement into a larger organizations, I think we'll see change at the political level as well in Pakistan. I think there is it's a very, very important balance and tension to maintain in any kind of productive academic work. The academic side of things, or the theoretical side of things, are very important to map the situation and to see yourself within a certain situation. So I'm very much for theory. I think theory allows you to create certain general principles around which you can map yourself. Even remember, the idea of the human is a theoretical construct, right? And it's a, relatively speaking, as compared to other constructs, it's a good construct, can be a good construct. Rights, again, is a theoretical construct. So there are a lot of theoretical constructs that are absolutely necessary for us to defend. However, when ideas translate onto the ground, and if you see empirical reality departing from theory, one should not say, too bad for reality, I'll stick to theory. True theory, or good theory, or useful theory is one that is informed by the practices of ordinary people, that is informed by material practices in the real world, whether these are institutional practices, whether these are transnational practices, so that it is not simply a genius thinking about the world in his or her own head, but it is very much tied to the knowledge production of the real object of analysis, which is the world out there. And one way people can contribute massively, I think it's a privilege that a lot of young academics are based in universities in the West. With all the difficulties, they still have access to a lot of resources that many of us in the global South don't. And I do think intellectuals have a very, very important role to play. Those movements who completely dismiss intellectuals as some kind of outsiders or ivory tower, there are ivory tower intellectuals who can be dismissed. But there are also some very, very good, solid intellectuals who help these movements by learning from them while also teaching them. This kind of a dialectic in which you are both the educator and the educated, as in both the teacher and the student at the same time, this process is the highest expression of theoretical consciousness. In that sense, one can also then be someone who is introducing theory into a movement, but is also then questioning the theory based on what he or she is learning from the movement. And without this two-way process, we become ivory intellectuals, totally detached from anything on the ground. And movements on the ground also suffer because movements at times require theoretical breakthroughs, require political education in order to take their struggles forward. And both are absolutely necessary for each other, and they must over time try to embed both of these things within the same struggle, rather than these two operating at a totally separate plane, because that, as I said, both hinders the struggle and also makes our theory much poorer.